So who was more at fault in this loss to Oregon? Tom Allen or Penn State's defenders? Honestly, both.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Zach Seyko. I am your host of the show. We are talking more about Penn State versus Oregon from here in Lucas Oil Stadium. I really appreciate this platform to be able to talk about Penn State football like this. And I want to start with Penn State's defense, talk about Drew Allar again. This one's not so much about the college football playoff, but the problems that Penn State had against Oregon, and they were all defensive. They were all defensive. I know there were some miscues offensively, don't get me wrong, but I can't stand here and look at this game and say, you know what, 37 points against Oregon, that should honestly get you a win 100 times out of 100 times. So who was at fault, Tom Allen or Penn State's defense? And at the end of the day, both bear equal responsibility. Tom Allen maybe not necessarily putting the players in the best positions to succeed, and then the guys that had to cover on their assignments, do different things, just make a play here and there, and they never did. Penn State never had an answer for Tez Johnson. Incredible slot receiver for Oregon, and he was named MVP accordingly so, right? But I look at this game, and Tom Allen did not make enough adjustments, enough timely adjustments. Pointed out in the live show. Can encourage everyone to go check that one out if you haven't already to get the live reaction in the moment. But Tez Johnson just tore this Penn State defense apart by himself, and it allowed other players, even the ground game with Jordan James and Whittington, to just continue to move the ball. Dillon Gabriel to always have that sense of security wherever he was going to go with the football and not have to force a pass. He could be selective. Or it just gave Terrence Ferguson, the tight ends for Oregon, a chance to make big plays within the offense. So when Penn State did devote its resources to Tez Johnson, it got penalized. But what was so telling was the fact that Tom Allen could have made this change. Maybe sooner, maybe more frequently, right? A.J. Harris shadowed Tez Johnson on 2 select third down plays. I get it. A.J. Harris is he's the boundary cornerback. You want to keep him where his best strength lies. But it worked. And in this game where you have the opportunity to make and be the number 1 seed, to knock off Oregon and get a bye, all bets are on the table. Why I don't understand if it's working, why you don't use it. So 2 select plays where Dillon Gabriel and Oregon ended up punting the football because A.J. Harris made Dillon Gabriel question. They made Dillon Gabriel question what he was going to do with the football when he was sitting in the slot. It was the one play over the middle. Dillon Gabriel was going to throw it to Tez Johnson or Terrence Ferguson, and A.J. Harris dropped into a hook zone, and he was there waiting for all of it. Then the next play, he followed him across the formation, and Tez Johnson was covered by A.J. Harris, and man-to-man, Dillon Gabriel didn't even look that way. He forced the ball to the other side of the field, completely away from Tez Johnson. Those were only 2 selected plays. Tom Allen bears responsibility for that because they needed to recognize, and James Franklin as well, right? He is the head coach. It starts and ends with him, but Tom Allen's calling the defensive plays. They need to make those adjustments. Anthony Poindexter and Terry Smith need to be on the same page and contribute that feedback. I'm not sure why that wasn't done earlier in the third quarter and why it wasn't done more frequently. Why am I only seeing 2 select plays that I can point to? And then it's also the fact that you should be able to leave A.J. Harris on the boundary. You should be able to have your number 1 cornerback lock down one side of the field and say, Cam Miller, Zion Tracy, we need you to do something to limit Tez Johnson. And none of them rose to the occasion. Neither of them were able to contain Tez Johnson. And then when Penn State doubled him and they did other things, Terrence Ferguson was getting open. So Zachy Wheatley, Jalen Reed, Kobe King, guys who were responsible for covering the tight end, didn't have an answer either. So Tom Allen not doing enough to help the Penn State defense out, but at the end of the day, the players they have responsibilities and they're supposed to execute on those. And too many times, guys were running wide open. Defensive line, I get it. The refs They were very quiet on Penn State's side of things. Penn State eventually cleaned up the penalties, whether they were 50-50 or not. Some of them were warranted, some of them weren't. It felt like nothing was called against Oregon, and you can't let the refs dictate the outcome of the game. Penn State needs to be in a winning position and not rely on, did the refs make this call? Did the refs do this? That's not winning football. It is not winning football to rely on the refs. Defensive line was honestly disappointing. Defensive line was extremely disappointing because Abdul Carter, Zane Durant, Denai Dennis Sutton should have been able to get more pressure on Dylan Gabriel, and the times that they did, Penn State's defense was able to get off the football field. But overall, no turnovers. I mean, that offensive line is up for the Joe Moore Award, the top offensive line in college football, for a reason. But Abdul Carter, on this show, we talk about him as a top 10 NFL pick, and I thought he did okay. Oregon was able to take him away. Denai Dennis Sutton had a couple select plays in here and there, and I circled Zane Durant as the guy that was going to, if anybody was going to wreck Oregon's game plan, it was going to be Zane Durant, because all the attention was going to be on Abdul, and it was. All the attention was going to be on Denai Dennis Sutton. Between Connerly and Cornelius, those two tackles for Oregon, it was up to Zane Durant and Devon J. Thomas. And honestly, Keziah Izzard had the best performance out of everybody on the defensive line. Smith Vilbert and Amin Vanover cycled in as well. Nobody had a bad performance on the defensive line. But again, with what was at stake and how the defensive line could have won this game for Penn State, they didn't. They didn't, and that's why it's a disappointing performance. It's an underwhelming performance. Did they have a bad one? No, not necessarily. Objectively, it was okay. But when all the responsibility was on Penn State's defensive line to do more, that's where they needed to step up, and they did. So Penn State's defense, they got to figure it out. Tom Allen's got to go back to the drawing board. They got to do something different with A.J. Harris. The defensive line isn't a problem, but they still, when the responsibility is on them to help out the secondary, that's a two-part thing. The secondary can't cover forever. Should they have been able to cover longer at times? Absolutely. But the defensive line has to get home. So when the secondary was covering for that extra second, 2 seconds, where's the defensive line? You got to make a play. And they didn't. So the Penn State defense across the board, Tom Allen bears responsibility. Defensive line didn't do enough to step up. The cornerbacks just needed something, especially from the slot DBs. Whether it was Zion Tracy, whether it was Cam Miller, they didn't step up. And they just something, because this was an 8-point game. This was a 1-score game and a 2-point conversion that we can talk about a little more here too. When we come back on the show, we're going to take a quick timeout, but when we return, we are going to discuss the offense, because the offense isn't the issue. Offensive line, ground game. Even Drew Allar, despite 2 interceptions, had a really good game. We'll talk about it more on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com, plus score an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites, from legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts and more. Save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at omahsteaks.com and get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. Again, that is Omaha Steaks. Where should we begin with Penn State's offense? Andy Kotelnicki was in his bag. Guy was supposed to be preparing for an interview for West Virginia, right? He's one of the finalists. Didn't seem bothered by it at all, distracted by it at all. Called a near perfect game, went toe-to-toe with Will Stein of Oregon. And at the end of the day, Oregon just has a lot of talent offensively. Veteran quarterback, NFL running back, lots of options in the passing game, a Joe Moore Award consideration when it comes to the offensive line. And Penn State's offense went toe-to-toe with that. 37 points. Penn State's offense wasn't the issue, but the difference was those couple of mistakes. The 2 interceptions by Drew Allar. I can fault him for the first one, especially because it was so consequential. There was 1 turnover in this game, or 2 turnovers, excuse me. One that led to points, particularly, is my point here. Drew Allar threw it behind Khalil Dinkins. Khalil Dinkins isn't turned around. I guess that's a timing route in some sort of sense, so it's a bang-bang play. But it felt like Drew Allar forced the football, and it was behind him. If it's even remotely on the numbers or in front of him where it's supposed to be, that's not an interception, and Oregon doesn't punch it in from the 1. That's the difference in the scoring, is that interception. And it was so consequential in the scheme of things. But Penn State's offense always kept them in the game. They always kept this team in the game overall, because the issues lie defensively, because Penn State's defense never got that other turnover back. They never got that game-changing play. Oregon got 2 of them. Let's talk about the second interception there with Drew Allar. Again, Andy Kotelnicki's play calling was near perfect. That 2nd and 1 play. I agree with Andy Kotelnicki and Penn State's offense going for the deep pass on 2nd and 1. I absolutely agree with that. And why? Because you want to take a shot. You have about, give or take, 2 minutes. It's after the 2-minute timeout. You take a shot deep downfield, and then if it's incomplete, it's 3rd and 1. And you can go back to and have your whole playbook entirely wide open. At some point, you just have to say the defender, the opposing player, made a better play. Drew Allar's throw was not perfect. Trey Wallace should have had inside leverage. The defensive back had great coverage. You could say, okay, again, was he holding? Was he not holding? You can't rely on the refs to make that judgment and keep Penn State in the game. Penn State just had to make more plays, and they didn't. It's not on the refs to make those calls for them. Penn State needs to be able to win the game on its own. Besides the point, at some point, you just have to say that Oregon's defensive back made the better play. And that's what happened. That's what happened. Trey Wallace tried to break it up. If that's an incomplete pass, or if Trey Wallace makes an exceptional, spectacular catch, we're talking about it's no different than the fake punt against Minnesota. The fake to Luke Reynolds. There is no difference between those 2 plays. It's incomplete. Trey Wallace makes the catch. James Franklin, Andy Kotelnicki look like geniuses to set up Penn State with leverage to at least make an attempt to tie the game, but it didn't happen that way. It ended up being the nail in the coffin, the dagger for this Penn State team. And I don't fault Penn State. I don't fault Kotelnicki for calling that play. I don't fault Drew for making that throw. Oregon defensive back just made a better play. That's really what it was. Drew Allar, I want to pull up his stats here, because I have his stats in front of me right now. And Allar, 20 of 39, 226 in total yards for passing, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, no sacks. No sacks. In a week where my biggest question mark, a few question marks, Penn State's offensive line, Penn State's DBs, particularly the ones not named A.J. Harris, and the ground game and Penn State's wide receivers, those were all the position groups that needed a big day. But the passing game and the ground game benefited it because it starts up front. Those guys from left to right, Drew Shelton, Vanga Ioane, Nick Dawkins, Sal Wormley, Nolan Rucci, and guys that had to rotate in, J.B. Nelson and Cooper Cousins, offensive line deserves as much credit as you can give them. That is an Oregon defensive line. I am not going to stand here and say that, that's the best defensive line in the country, but that is one of the best defensive lines that they faced. That's one of the best defensive lines that they have faced all seasons, if not the best. Ohio State's the only other one, and that was the difference. Ohio State's defensive line made such a difference in that Penn State game. Oregon's defensive line did not make a difference in this game. They apply, and when they impacted certain plays, but they didn't dominate the way that they could have. They should have. Look at these stats. A ground game that struggled most recently against Purdue, Minnesota, Maryland. Those 3 teams. That's who the ground game was struggling against. And Penn State came out, ran the football effectively. Katron Allen, almost disappeared down the stretch here. 14 carries, 124 yards, a rushing touchdown. Nicholas Singleton, 10 carries, 105 yards, no touchdowns. The argument could be made, and Drew Allar had 54 yards on the ground and a rushing touchdown. The argument could be made, why didn't Penn State run the football more? Well, they couldn't, because they were playing from behind, and when you're behind, you don't exactly get the luxury of running the football. You run the football when you're up by a score or you're leading to chew clock. So Penn State being down by 18 at one point in time, the offense kept them in the game. The throws that Drew Allar was making, just a little bit above a 50% completion percentage. Drew Allar was making acrobatic throws where his feet weren't set. I know he had a couple errant passes here and there and the turnovers, but the throws that they needed him to make, the fourth down play to Trey Wallace in this end zone. What other quarterbacks are making those plays? As he's being hit, pretty sure I probably should have exited the game with the left arm injury, but he toughed it out. Drew Allar played a gritty game, and the offense kept them in it. If you want to sit and point to specific mistakes where the offense could have done better, absolutely, they're all going to look at that way. They could have done more. They could have scored more. But 45 points. Defense bears a lot of responsibility here. The offensive line, I couldn't have had a better game. It starts and ends with them on offense, and everybody benefited offensively. Drew, Nick, Katron, even the wide receivers had, again, Trey Wallace. Trey Wallace in this game had 4 catches for 59 yards and a touchdown. Singleton was active in the receiving game. Ty Warren had 7 receptions, 84 yards. Mari Evans had a touchdown himself. So the pass catchers even benefited because they had time to get open in their routes. They had time to make plays. Drew still had time to go through his reads. These are the kinds of games, though, where the margin of error is so razor thin, where an interception, one mistake, one big mistake, an interception in the red zone in your own territory costs you the game. So that's the difference between good and great teams, because you can get away with that against USC, West Virginia, Minnesota, right? Oregon, it's going to make you pay. They're going to make you pay, and they're going to make you remember about it, and that's why Penn State was playing from behind so much. But I wonder, had Penn State, had it been in reverse, and Penn State was able to lead this game, and they had the momentum, the defense never gave the offense a break, and they were still able to put up 37 points in this case. So now what does Penn State need to do? I mean, this was a Big Ten championship that, yes, we are going to know the results from the college football playoff rankings, and we'll see which matchup Penn State's going to play. But just in general, what does Penn State need to do so that these same mistakes don't happen in whatever game they play in the postseason? We'll talk about it more on the other side of this break. And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. You can keep up with the NFL action over on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet just $5. $5 is all it takes, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And the Lions will be out for Penn State and that college football playoff opponent. FanDuel will have all the lines available: money line, spread, total. If you think Penn State wins it all, they'll even have a prop for the college football playoff champion. And if you like Penn State, you can bet that over at FanDuel.com. And remember, you will get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So what changes does Penn State need to make? A lot of them are going to come on the defense. What does Penn State need to do? There's only so much you can do, but you need guys to step up. You're going to have to hold them accountable. I think the biggest change that you make is, and this, I can't tell you what scheme, what the schematics are going to look like, but you really, as Tom Allen and this defense really need to consider having A.J. Harris. If somebody has an elite playmaking type of wide receiver, wherever he goes, A.J. Harris follows. When it's a winner-take-all situation, the #1 seed was on the line in this stadium. You could have had a bye. You could have had the extra opportunity to get healthier. Why not? Why not do it? I understand the argument by saying, hey, we need A.J. Harris to play where he's most comfortable, where his strengths are best, in the slot, over the middle of the field. But I think it's okay to sacrifice some of those things just to get your best pound-for-pound defender in the secondary against the opponent, Oregon's in this case, Tez Johnson, best pound-for-pound overall playmaker. Have him follow him. Good on good, great on great. In this game, elite on elite. A.J. Harris looked every bit of elite. He shut down Evan Stewart. Evan Stewart has a future in the NFL. Did Evan Stewart even have a catch in this game? I want to double check that. Evan Stewart did not register a catch in this game. Who shadowed him all night? A.J. Harris. A.J. Harris was the key to this game and can be the key to Penn State's defense succeeding in the postseason if they use him more efficiently. They use him effectively. And it's not that he's not being used effectively, but he could be used more effectively. So they really have to consider if you face Oregon again, if Penn State faces another team that just has that all-around superstar wide receiver, because you're not going to get that every single time. You need A.J. Harris to shadow him at all costs. In the slot, on the boundary, if he's in motion, just trail him. And it's difficult. It is difficult to do that. I understand it is difficult. It's easier said than done because you're going to have to change a lot about your scheme. Penn State runs a hybrid. They run man and they run zone. So if A.J. Harris is going to shadow a defender all around the football field, you're going to have to change your scheme and you're going to have to put the challenge on Jalen Kimber, Zion Tracy, Davian Collins. Hopefully Elliott Washington can return and play a little more down the stretch here. Maybe these 2 weeks will be good for him to get healthier. At the end of the day, Penn State is going to have to decide what they want to do because A.J. Harris showed that he can cover whomever, wherever on the football field. And Oregon avoided that at all costs. They avoided A.J. Harris all night long. But that's going to change a lot of the schematics. So they got to work on that or find a way to use it effectively. You can't just tip your hand and say, we're going to run man on third down, but try to find ways to disguise it and stuff if you can. Easier said than done. I'm not a football coach, but I think that would really help them, especially against teams that have just such an elite playmaker on the other side, especially at the wide receiver position. See if you can get hopefully healthy. Anything at linebacker would help. Kobe King playing a lot of snaps, Tony Rojas playing a lot of snaps. Keon Wiley coming back would be huge for the team. See if you can get Dom DeLuca more involved. I thought he had one of the best games of the season, maybe even his career. Dom DeLuca showed a lot in this game. Penn State actually ran 3 linebacker sets. They switched to a 4-3 against Oregon, so it's dependent on personnel. Since Oregon wanted to run a little bit of power football here and there, they went to a 4-3, and Dom DeLuca flourished. So maybe you consider running a little bit more of a 4-3. It's all on the defense. If Penn State's offense can just clean up the small mistakes here and there, and Penn State's defense not necessarily make wholesale adjustments. However, they still need to make significant changes because you're going to go up against teams that are going to make you pay for these kinds of mistakes. You don't know who you're going to face in the playoff. The committee could sneak anybody in at this point in time, and we will see. But depending on the matchup, Penn State's going to have to get creative, and in a winner-take-all situation, I think all bets are on the table. All the cards are laid out. You have to do something in the moment, and I don't think Penn State did that enough here at Lucas Oil Stadium. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. We'll see how everything unfolds with the College Football Playoff Committee, and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about the rankings. We'll analyze the matchups and see what Penn State can do so that this kind of game doesn't hold them back in the future when you are completely out. You lose the Big Ten championship, you're still in the college football playoff. That's what's great about this 12-team format. But that's going to do it for me here in Lucas Oil Stadium. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm your host of Locked On Nittany Lions. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Thank you so much for being along for these conversations about Penn State football as now fully immersed in the postseason. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. I'd really appreciate it if you left a like on this show. Subscribe if you're not already. Become an everydayer. And I'll talk to you very soon on the next edition of Locked On Nittany Lions.